It was one of those gentle late summer Saturdays that feel like a gift after a long week, the kind of evening when the sky melts into shades of coral and lavender, and even the neighborhood dogs seem to settle into a lazy calm. The cul-de-sac, where we live, had never felt safer or more ordinary. Sprinklers whispered across manicured lawns, children's laughter echoed faintly from a backyard 2 houses down, and the soft scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the warm aroma of dinners being prepared behind screen doors. Inside our modest home, I moved between stove and counter, stirring a pot of homemade soup while listening to the clink of dishes and the hum of the refrigerator, occasionally glancing toward the front porch where my 14-year-old daughter, Emily, sat in her wheelchair. Born with cerebral palsy, Emily has always faced physical challenges that would discourage many, yet she carries an unshakable love of life and a curiosity that lights every room she enters. That evening, she was radiant, dressed in her favorite lilac t-shirt, hair pulled back in a ponytail that framed her bright, hopeful eyes. She had begged to go see the small garden near the HOA green space, a place she adores for its riot of late-blooming flowers and the soothing chorus of crickets that gather as dusk settles. We've walked or rolled there countless times, so I waved her off with a smile, knowing the short pathway was safe and well lit, and promised to join her soon with a thermos of tea. As she carefully guided her chair down the smooth walkway, the neighborhood's tranquility wrapped around us like a familiar blanket, so ordinary it lulled me into thinking that nothing in the world could break it. But ordinary can shatter in the space of a heartbeat. I had just ladled soup into bowls when a sound like the cracking of a giant tree branch tore through the air, sharp, violent, and wrong. At first my mind refused to place it. A firecracker? A car backfiring on the distant highway? The thought barely formed before a second report slammed against the walls of our kitchen, followed almost immediately by a third. Time warped. The world seemed to constrict around those three brutal explosions. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered to the tile as a primal, icy dread surged through me. Somewhere outside, people were shouting, voices pitched high with panic. The neighborhood that had felt like a sanctuary only moments ago suddenly seemed full of hidden danger. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else, the ticking clock, the simmering soup, even my own breath. In that terrible instant, every mother's worst fear crystallized in my chest. Emily was out there. Alone. My mind leapt through possibilities with a sickening clarity. Had a car lost control on the curve? Had someone's careless celebration turned deadly? But none of them fit the cadence of those blasts. They were too precise, too deliberate. Gunshots. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Panic detonated inside me. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, my chair scraping hard against the table, heart screaming louder than any rational thought. As I flung the door open, the golden light of sunset had curdled into something menacing, the once welcoming street now eerily distorted. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on like alarm beacons, and somewhere a dog howled as if it, too, understood the rupture that had just torn through our quiet world. The familiar scene, the trimmed hedges, the mailbox standing crooked, as always, blurred at the edges as adrenaline flooded my body. All I could see, all I could think of, was Emily. In the span of 3 gunshots, a peaceful evening had collapsed into a nightmare, and every second that passed before I could reach her felt like a lifetime measured in heartbeats and terror. I tore across the lawn barefoot, the sharp edges of gravel biting into my feet, but registering only as distant sparks of pain against the thunder of my heartbeat. The evening air, moments ago soft and sweet, now felt heavy and metallic, every breath tasting of fear and gunpowder. As I rounded the hedge at the corner of our yard, the scene struck me like a physical blow. My daughter sat frozen in her wheelchair at the edge of the HOA's decorative garden, her lilac shirt a bright target under the bruised sunset, eyes wide and wet with terror. Just 10 paces away stood Patricia Keller, our neighbor whose name had long been whispered in exasperation and whose rigid devotion to HOA rules had earned her the unkind but fitting nickname of the neighborhood Karen. Patricia's face was contorted into a mask of rage, so sharp it seemed carved from stone. Her hands, pale and trembling, gripped the black barrel of a handgun that still smoked faintly from the shots she had just fired. "She's trespassing!" Patricia shrieked, her voice slicing the evening like broken glass. "I told you people, this is private HOA property. I warned you all." Her words cracked with a manic conviction that sent a chill through every bystander who had begun to gather along the sidewalks, drawn by the echo of gunfire. Some neighbors shouted for her to stop, others fumbled for their phones, but no one dared move closer. Emily, my sweet, gentle Emily, clutched the armrest of her wheelchair as though it might lift her out of harm's way, her lips moving soundlessly. I sprinted toward her, every muscle screaming, a single thought pounding in rhythm with my heart. Get to her, shield her. Patricia swung her aim slightly as I approached, a movement so slight and yet so unbearable that it burned into my memory like a scar. "Don't come closer," she barked. "I have every right to defend this property." I could barely process the words. All I could see was the fragile curve of Emily's shoulders and the tremor that racked her small frame. "Emily, it's okay. I'm here," I called, trying to keep my voice steady, even as terror clawed at my throat. The world around me seemed to dim. The neighbors' cries, the rustle of leaves, the faraway wail of sirens, all blurred into a single urgent pulse of danger. I planted myself between the muzzle of Patricia's gun and my daughter, throwing my arms out in a shield I hoped my own body could provide. "She's a child," I shouted, my voice raw. "She's done nothing. She's sitting on a public walkway." Patricia's eyes darted wildly, her jaw clenched, and for a heartbeat, I feared she would squeeze the trigger again, logic drowned by the storm of obsession that had been brewing for years. This was the same woman who once left angry notes because a child's bike leaned against a fence, who photographed every mailbox for code violations, who turned neighborhood barbecues into lectures about bylaws and shrub heights. Yet none of those petty grievances hinted at the fury that now burned in her eyes, a fury strong enough to justify, at least in her mind, pointing a loaded gun at a disabled teenager. Behind me, I felt Emily's small hand clutch the back of my shirt, trembling like a bird trapped in a storm. The scent of gunpowder still hung thick, mingled now with the acrid smell of fierce sweat on my own skin. Around us, the world held its breath. Neighbors stood frozen on their porches and lawns, some holding their children close, others whispering frantic prayers. The sirens, growing louder, became the only proof that time was still moving forward and that help was on its way. But in that moment, between Patricia's ragged breaths and the cold eye of the gun that refused to lower, time felt suspended, and the fragile barrier between life and tragedy seemed as thin as the evening air. The shriek of sirens now filled the air like a relentless alarm clock for a nightmare that refused to end, but the distance between their wail and their arrival stretched like an eternity. Around us, the once placid cul-de-sac had transformed into a stage of raw panic. Neighbors spilled out of front doors, clutching cell phones and crying out warnings, some dragging their children back inside, while others stood rooted to the spot, their faces pale in the fading light. A chorus of frantic voices rose, pleading, shouting, praying, but nothing seemed to pierce the electric tension that hung between Patricia's trembling trigger finger and the fragile space where my daughter and I stood. The smell of gunpowder had settled into the air like a bitter fog, mingling with the scent of garden soil and cut grass until the ordinary sweetness of summer turned into something sour and metallic. Emily clung to the back of my shirt with a grip that felt impossibly strong for her slender frame, her small body quaking so violently that I could feel each tremor through my own spine. She whispered in a voice barely audible over the chaos, "Mom, I was just looking at the flowers. I didn't do anything." The innocence in her words cut deeper than any scream could have, a reminder of the sheer absurdity of the danger we were facing. I turned my head slightly, keeping my body shielded in front of her, and whispered back, "I know, sweetheart. I know. I've got you." But inside, a hurricane of terror spun out of control. Images of what might happen next, Patricia's finger twitching, the sudden crack of another shot, the unimaginable flashed in rapid succession. each more unbearable than the last. Patricia's own breathing had turned ragged and uneven, a chilling soundtrack to the madness. "This is HOA property," she barked again, as though repeating the phrase could turn fiction into fact. "You people think you can just ignore the rules." Her words trembled with an anger that felt less like a defense of property and more like the eruption of years of pent-up resentment and obsession. The neighbors' voices grew sharper. "Put it down, Patricia!" someone shouted. "The police are coming," cried another. From across the street, an elderly man I'd known for years stepped forward, hands raised, his voice a steady plea. "Patricia, please, this isn't you. No one is trespassing. Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." But his courage only seemed to agitate her further. She swung her gaze toward him, the barrel of the gun flicking in his direction for a heart-stopping instant before snapping back to us. I instinctively pulled Emily closer, my mind racing through every possible way to de-escalate the standoff. My voice shook but rose as firmly as I could manage. "Patricia, listen to me. Emily is a child. She hasn't stepped off the path. This is a public walkway, you know that. Please, just lower the gun. We can talk." The words felt fragile, like paper shields against a storm. The world had collapsed into fragments. The pounding of my heart, the metallic tang in the air, the distant blue and red flashes reflecting off windows as the first police car turned the corner, and through it all Emily's soft sobs, a steady, heartbreaking reminder of the stakes. The sirens roared closer, but every second stretched unbearably long. Each heartbeat a reminder that tragedy could still strike before help arrived. Somewhere behind us, a neighbor's porch light snapped on with a brittle click, the sudden brightness slicing across Patricia's face and illuminating the wild gleam in her eyes. In that stark light, she looked almost unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing the skin of the neighbor who once exchanged pleasantries about garbage collection and holiday decorations. The transformation was terrifying. I felt every muscle in my body tighten, ready to throw myself over Emily if the worst happened. Around us, the crowd collectively held its breath, a neighborhood united in silent desperation, waiting for the arrival of flashing lights and authoritative voices that might, just might, pull us all back from the edge of irreversible tragedy. The wail of sirens that had seemed so agonizingly far away finally swelled into a deafening crescendo as a pair of patrol cars screeched to a halt at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, their red and blue lights slicing through the deepening twilight like electric lightning. Doors flew open and officers spilled out in swift, practiced motion, their weapons drawn but their voices calm and commanding as they shouted, "Drop the gun! Drop it now!" The sudden authority of their presence cracked the taut silence that had strangled the neighborhood for what felt like hours, but Patricia didn't flinch, not at first. She stood rigid, the handgun quivering in her grasp, her face a mask of defiance and confusion lit in harsh flashes of blue and red. "This is my right," she shouted back, her voice hoarse and cracking. "I'm protecting HOA property. She was trespassing. I warned everyone." The words came out almost as a chant, as though sheer repetition might transform delusion into law. Two officers slowly advanced, keeping a careful distance, their palms raised in open, measured gestures. "Ma'am," one said with the kind of firm patience that carries both authority and urgent pleading, "this is a public walkway. You are pointing a loaded weapon at a child. Put the gun down now, and no one will get hurt." Behind them, more officers fanned out, some ushering frightened neighbors back inside, others positioning themselves to block any line of fire. The neighborhood, moments ago a theater of chaos, now pulsed with tense coordination. Yet Patricia seemed deaf to all reason. Her eyes darted wildly between the officers, the growing crowd, and the small patch of grass where Emily's wheelchair stood like a silent witness to her madness. "You don't understand," she yelled, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "The HOA rules are clear, no loitering in the common garden after dusk. She's been warned. You let one rule slide and the whole neighborhood falls apart. I have a right to defend what we built." Each sentence was sharper and more frantic than the last, an unraveling thread of obsession that clung to imagined authority. The officer's voice grew firmer, slicing through the night like a bell of reason. Patricia, this is not a discussion about HOA rules. This is an armed standoff with a child in danger. You are committing a felony. Put the gun down and step back. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Hesitation, fear, the dim realization that her fantasy of righteous enforcement had collided with the unshakable reality of law. The tension was unbearable. I could hear Emily's soft whimper behind me and feel the tremor of her breath against my back. My own knees threatened to buckle under the weight of adrenaline and dread. Then, almost imperceptibly, Patricia's shoulders slumped. The barrel of the gun dipped an inch, then another, until finally it hung at her side. An officer seized the moment, stepping forward with deliberate speed to ease the weapon from her grasp, while another gently but firmly turned her around and cuffed her hands behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed like a release of air from a balloon stretched to bursting. A collective exhale swept through the crowd of neighbors who had watched in suspended terror, some clutching each other, others wiping tears they hadn't realized were falling. But even as she was led toward the flashing patrol car, Patricia's voice did not soften. "You're making a mistake," she barked, twisting against the hold of the officer guiding her. "I was protecting the neighborhood. I warned everyone this would happen if the rules weren't enforced." The words, once sharp with conviction, now sounded hollow, brittle, almost desperate as the reality of flashing lights and unyielding law closed around her. Cameras on porches and cell phones captured every second, proof of the insanity we had endured and the innocence of a disabled child who had only wanted to smell the flowers. Yet, as Patricia disappeared into the back seat of the police car, still muttering about trespassers and bylaws, the night did not immediately feel safe. The acrid smell of gunpowder still clung to the air, and the echoes of her shouted justifications reverberated in my mind, a reminder of how quickly obsession can twist into violence. I gathered Emily into my arms, feeling the tremor of her sobs against my chest, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, allowed myself to breathe, knowing that the danger had passed. But the wound to our sense of safety and to Emily's fragile trust in the world would linger far longer than the flashing lights on the street. Long after the patrol cars had driven away and the last flash of blue and red light faded from the darkened street, the echoes of that night remained, like a storm that had passed but left its thunder stitched into the air. Our neighborhood, once a quiet tapestry of trimmed lawns and friendly waves, now felt altered at its roots. Every porch light, a wary sentinel, every rustle of evening breeze carrying the memory of 3 shattering gunshots. Inside our home, the silence felt heavy, not restful but fragile, as though one sudden noise might fracture it all over again. Emily clung to me long after midnight, her small body still trembling from the surge of fear, her eyes wide and restless even as exhaustion pulled at her. "Mom," she whispered again and again, "I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to see the flowers." Each time she said it, my heart clenched tighter, because she was right, and because no child should ever have to defend the innocence of simply being outside. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of interviews and paperwork, police statements, witness accounts, legal consultations, each conversation reopening wounds we longed to close. Local news vans parked at the end of the street, reporters politely persistent as they sought the story of the HOA gun incident, but no headline could capture the private terror of watching a neighbor aim a gun at your child. The footage from porch cameras and cell phones spread quickly across social media, and the comments poured in outrage, sympathy, calls for justice. Yet, the public fury could not soothe Emily's nightmares. She woke repeatedly in the small hours, crying out from dreams where the gun never lowered, where help never came. I would sit on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair, whispering the same promise, "You're safe now, you're safe," even as a part of me still questioned whether safety was something I could honestly guarantee. Our community, shaken to its core, responded with a surprising unity. Neighbors we'd only ever waved to brought meals and flowers, some leaving cards filled with prayers and phone numbers in case we needed anything at any hour. A retired teacher down the street organized a candlelight vigil on the corner near the garden, and dozens gathered, candles flickering like fragile stars, to show that Emily was not alone and that violence had no place here. The HOA board, facing an avalanche of public outrage and legal scrutiny, called an emergency meeting that overflowed with residents demanding accountability. They suspended Patricia's membership indefinitely and issued a formal apology to our family, though no policy change could erase the sight of her finger on that trigger. In the courthouse days later, we sat through a bond hearing where Patricia, now a defendant in an orange jumpsuit, repeated her mantra of protecting the neighborhood, her voice quieter but no less fixed on the fantasy that nearly destroyed us. The charges, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment, carry years of prison time, and prosecutors assured us they would pursue the case vigorously. Yet, justice in legal terms felt small compared to the emotional rebuilding that lay ahead. Emily began counseling with a trauma specialist who uses gentle play and art to help children reclaim a sense of safety, and slowly, I've seen flickers of her old spark return. A shy smile at a neighbor's joke, a quiet request to paint the flowers she had gone out to admire that evening. For me, the resolve has taken a different shape. I find myself speaking out at HOA meetings, at city council sessions, in interviews about mental health awareness, about sensible gun laws, about how easily obsession can escalate when no one intervenes. What happened on our street was not simply one neighbor's madness. It was the result of a culture that confuses control with safety and rules with compassion. I cannot rewrite the night those gunshots split the air, but I can refuse to let silence be its final echo. So I keep telling the story, Emily's story, our story, because every retelling is both a wound and a shield, a way to honor what we survived, and a plea to ensure that no child, disabled or not, will ever again face the cold barrel of fear for daring to enjoy a summer evening's flowers.